Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Landi explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time podcast. Rabbi Lendi, it's so wonderful to have you back with the podcast.
It's really good to be here. I miss recording.
Yes.
Yeah.
For those who are listening, Rabbi Lendi was sick last week, and so we had a special guest, but very, very happy to have you back in the chair.
Yeah, and we're going to be addressing themes related to being sick today, so it's fantastic.
Illness, contamination, quarantine, and holiness. Sacred nature. So we're bringing up this topic because just last week...
What's our topic?
Well, I'm going to introduce it now.
Sorry.
Just last week, we entered into the third book of the Torah, the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, which is very much based upon rituals of holiness and purity, sanctification within the temple. And we wanted to talk about this because I think we share the idea that this is one of the most misunderstood and often undervalued sections of the Torah because it is not necessarily the most approachable or easy to read section of the entire Torah. So before I have an opening Leviticus story I want to share, but do you have anything else you want to say about Leviticus and Vayikra as we set it up?
Yeah, so Vayikra, which is the name in Hebrew, and he was called. It's really about the development of a structure of how you become a people, how you worship, how you engage in ritual, mostly for the purpose of becoming close with God and becoming close as a community. And so I'm excited to talk about it. It's very meaningful for me. In my bat mitzvah portion, which is the worst of Vayikra, or the best, comes from Leviticus. So yeah, what's your story?
Well, I want to talk about that. The parsha of Tazria Mitzvah is what I'm going to speak about right now.
Oh, I only had Tazria, so if you can certainly speak about it.
So the parsha that you're speaking of is one that is made famous because the two are often coupled together on years that don't have a second Adar, on years that have the shorter calendar, because they deal with such wonderful topics as seminal emissions, wall fungus, leprosy, and other types of blood coming out of your body.
Impurity.
And purity, yes, that's a nice way of saying it. So here's the story I wanted to tell. I'm a first-year rabbinical student in Jerusalem. I'm living in Nachlaot. My morning ritual was to get on my bicycle, come down, stop at the Makolet, the little store, get my little sakit shoko, my little bag of chocolate milk, drink it in my mouth as I'm biking down the hill. Of course, you have the entire vision. Coming down from like the Mashpir, from like the top of Ben Yehuda Street, and then you're coming down on Hillel Street, you know exactly where I'm going.
Yeah.
And I take a right-hand turn into Gan Hatzmaut, into Independence Park, right where now there's the big Museum of Tolerance, like monstrosity building that's been built there.
On top of a sacred burial ground?
Yes, with a cafe next door. And so I'm flying down because that morning I'm giving my first year dvar Torah, my sermon, and it's on Tazria Mitzvah. And I've got it all ready to go. And I got my little bag of chocolate milk going. I'm biking down the hill, and in Gan Hatzmaut in Independence Park, there is a woman in a car, and she backs out without looking, and she backs directly into me as I'm flying down the hill on my bike, knocks me off of my bike, and I'm lying on my back, like looking up at the sky.
Helmet.
Helmet, of course,
Okay,
but
good.
this is unfortunately one of several bike accidents I've gotten into in my life. Been being a long time bike commuter. I'm lying down on the ground, like face up, and she comes looking at me and she's panicked. She thinks she's killed me.
Yeah.
And she sees me there, and like with blood trickling down my forehead, I look up at her and in my very broken first year Hebrew say, Aval yeshli dvar Torah hayom. Like, but I have to give my sermon today. At which point she just starts bawling out of just like she was so nervous and like that I'm alive, and that's what I would say back to her. And so I then, after I fix it up everything with this driver, lovely young woman, get on my bike, get my way to HUC, and I have to give my opening first year dvar Torah on Tazria Mitzvah, which is a lot about like blood and purity, and blood is literally running down my forehead, and I'm dabbing it as I'm giving it, to the head of the school's utter amusement the entire time. And so whenever now I think of this section, that's my memory. This is your bat mitzvah Torah portion we're talking about. So do you have memories to share of that as well? Hopefully less terrible than what I just shared.
I feel like I have spent a lot of my career writing, helping students maybe write the sermon that I didn't even know how to give at age 12 about Tazria Mitzvah. Like, what does a 12-year-old have to know about purity? What does a 12-year-old have to say about issues of childbirth? And so, I was pretty horrified that I got this Torah reading. Like I've said this before, I was the daughter of the rabbi, and this is just the one parsha that no one else had. So I got it. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and it's actually become a really important text for me. It's a very beautiful text. It's a very empowering text that our tradition gives so much attention to ideas about ritual purity and what it means to be engaged in a holy relationship. But so maybe can we just start like explaining what Sefer Vayikra is about?
Can I say one last thing about the bat mitzvah thing and then come to that? I want to say that this is often a point where this dilemma meets our families, because from around the beginning of March until around mid-May, we are reading most often from Sefer Vayikra, from the Book of Leviticus. And these are not narratives for the most part, but these are mostly different laws of purity and some of the most difficult sections to read and to give a sermon about ever as a bar bat mitzvah. It's funny because the summer months of July and August, filled with wonderful stories from Bamidbar, from the Book of Numbers, are largely lost to a lot of our kids because they don't do B'nai Mitzvah, don't become B'nai Mitzvah over the summer. And so very often we as a clergy find that in this sort of high traffic time of B'nai Mitzvah, so many of our students have B'nai Mitzvah that involve this section of the Torah that I feel like you and I very often, along with many other congregational rabbis, need to introduce, explain, and make relevant this section. What we're doing for our listeners now is something that we do widely for in a large swath of our B'nai Mitzvah population. And so, with that,
So, Sefer Vayikra is mostly about the ritual sacrifices and the different kinds of ritual sacrifices that are made in the Mishkan, or that are made in the tabernacle by the Kohanim, by the priests. And it's this new system of how to become close to God. There's these ritual sacrifices for all sorts of different reasons. There's a sin offering, there's a collective sin offering, there's an offering of thanks, there's an offering of praise, there's offerings for specific moments. And the sacrifice is made, the food is the animal is drained of its blood, because you have to take out any sign of life. Life and death can never coexist in the Jewish tradition. That's also related to kashrut. That's why we take blood out of meat, so that there's no connection between life and death. Like life is sanctified and death is not. It's respected, but it's not sanctified. And then it's either burned and that smell goes up to God and is pleasing, or it is eaten by the Kohanim.
Or by the people.
Or by the people. And it's so much that has nothing to do with our life today. We're not making ritual sacrifices. We have, thank God, replaced ritual sacrificing with prayer and with acts with mitzvot and with other concrete action items that are not making bloody animal sacrifices. But I think that it is so interesting that we have this entire system, which is about how do you create closeness. And the word for a sacrifice is a korban, which also means victim, which is interesting. There's a lot of wordplay in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And korban comes from the root kuf resh bet, which also means like kirva, like closeness. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that when you make a sacrifice, which you give up something of yourself or give up something that's important to you, or give up the life of this animal, you are creating an infrastructure of closeness with God. You're creating, and there's different ways of approaching that closeness. You're approaching that closeness, first of all, by preparing your mind and your body and your hands and your everything for that. You have to become ritually pure. And so I think that even though this seems so far removed from Chappaqua, from Bethel, from daily Jewish life today, I think that the themes of how do we create closeness, and how do you create closeness with boundaries, and how do you create closeness with God and with other people, they're still so relevant. It's basically, how do you function in a society where you're driven by purpose and values?
Yeah, I think it's a lovely introduction, and I think that you and I share this real passion and sort of reverence for this text. I think one thing I'd say in introduction is that I think we often judge texts and leaders through our own modern ideals, much as people would say that maybe George Washington or Abraham Lincoln aren't as, with the times as we would like them to be. You have to remember that in the ancient times, that first of all, that very often human sacrifice was practiced, and the Torah acknowledges Molech of a nearby tribe, which burns its own in the fire, and that the Book of Leviticus is a incredible revolutionary step forward to say that we don't do this, that human life is sacred, and that we are going to substitute now and use an animal instead for something. Now, Maimonides, in his commentary, talks about, well, this is even a crutch itself, that we are moving now from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice, because the people weren't ready yet to move on to something like an ineffable God.
Yeah.
And that in Egypt, they saw animal sacrifice, and so they're bringing it with them as well. So this is one step along the way. But we need to acknowledge the fact that this is a huge change. I want to connect this to something that we explained in a podcast earlier about bereavement. Similarly, the idea of us tearing our clothing is a revolutionary step away from tearing at our flesh, which again, making marks on your flesh for loved ones who have died, that was an ancient practice that the Torah is now repudiating and is saying, no, the human body is sacred. We're not going to cut it at our body. We're definitely not going to sacrifice. Humans are made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that because of this idea of sanctity, we will do no harm to the human body. And not only that, we won't even offer a sacrifice any animal or thing that is blemished at all. It's only going to be sort of those things that are in the right, perfect condition in that way. And that speaks to this whole idea of sanctity of life. And I have so much more to say about that, but I want to just go back to you about this. Do you think that's fair? The idea that this Torah, that this text is so ahead of its time, even if we look at it now through, through the eyes that are not as kind.
Not as kind or not as conditioned,
Yes.
maybe for animal sacrifice.
Mhm.
It's interesting that part of the ritual that we were talking about, which is ritual purity, is preparing yourself. You have to be in a certain state to even be able to bring a sacrifice. And I really, really like that idea that you can't just say like, oh, I like committed a sin, or I thought something wrong, and here's my goat.
Right.
You have to go prepare yourself. You have to make sure that you have done a process of, there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. And what you were saying about separating like life, which is sanctified, from death, which is
profane,
right?
but still,
it's not profane. It's a fact, but we don't go towards it. We hold on to life at all costs.
I don't mean profane in a negative
No,
sense.
I understand.
I mean, like
It's
the 6 days of the week are profane. The one day of Shabbat is
Monday.
holy, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And the idea that you have to, like, if you've even encountered death, then you need to wait before you can even make a sacrifice. If you've come near the blood of birth, if you've birthed a child, you've been on the brink of death. That means that you need to wait until you are past that, and that you are healed before you can offer a sacrifice, before you can be ritually pure. One of the issues that a lot of modern eyes have with this text is like women are, it's a lot harder for women to become pure.
You have to wait longer after giving birth to a woman before, rather than a man, before being purified again.
Right. And you're also dealing with your own menstruation, and you're always kind of between the life and the death, because blood represents life, but life leaving your body.
Yeah.
And so you're always kind of going between those two places. And what Leviticus tries to do is just create structure and say, yeah, like, we're always going to kind of be on the seam between life and death, but here's how we create structure to make sure that our society functions in a way towards perpetuating life and towards making choices that are holy. And I think that when we're talking with our teens about texts like this, it so much reflects like, how do you make choices in your life that are going to be that are going to be sacred, that are going to be thoughtful, that are going to be intentional, that are going to be safe. And so I think that Leviticus really gives a structure for those conversations that we're having in the modern world.
I have so many things to say in response. I don't want to like overshare here. So the first, I'd say that I agree with everything that you say. I think that we should be able to give our listeners also some context. We keep using the word Leviticus, which is the Latin name for it, but the
Right.
name Leviticus comes from the tribe, the Levites, the Leviim, who themselves are in charge of the sacrificial rites of the Mishkan. And within the Levites, there is the family of Kohanim, the priests, who are the ones offering the sacrifices like in the center of the Mishkan. And so when you hear the words like Leviticus or Vayikra, that it all has to do with that. Second thing is I want to turn to we talked a little bit there about illness and about and again, we've been with your illness last week as well. One of the fundamental revolutionary leaps that this section of the Torah makes that again is often overlooked is that within the ancient world, very often, if someone was sick, if someone had some sort of a skin disease, especially tzara'at is the one named in Leviticus, that the basic thought was that this person had been possessed, demonized, or was being punished by God. That is, that there was there's a pattern of blaming the victim to say something's wrong with you. You need an exorcism. You need to be bled. Do you remember, this might be ahead of your time, but there was in the first year of Saturday Night Live, there was a fantastic skit that
I know exactly what you're
Steve
talking
Martin, right? And he's like the bloodletter. He says, ha ha ha, 100 years ago, we would have thought that there was a troll living in your body, but now we're much more. Now we know that actually that just there's a demon that has taken over your blood, something like that. And so they keep getting more leeches and leeches and leeches, right? So that sort of comes out of that same school. And Leviticus takes a huge jump forward. It says, you know what? Sometimes people just get sick. We don't know exactly why, but it doesn't mean that that's a bad person. It doesn't mean that they are dangerous or need to be vilified for it. It just means they're sick. What we need to do is we need to remove them from the community so that there's no spread, but then we have to create transparent public rituals to fully bring them back into community as fully functioning individuals as a way that really did not exist before the book of Leviticus. Leviticus, for the first time, separates the person who is sick from any sort of judgment of moral failure in order to get there. And it's fascinating to me that our later commentators actually are less mindful of this. When our later commentators like Rashi say that tzara'at, the skin disease, is due to lashon hara, is due to gossip, they're undoing everything that Leviticus has done. They're saying basically the person deserved this because they've done something. Leviticus separates that and says, don't judge the victim, don't judge the patient. If someone gets COVID, right? When someone got COVID, we just made very clear ways to remove them from society temporarily, and then they were brought back full standing without any judgment about them. You're smiling. You can say there's all sorts of politicalization that happened around this, but it's a very similar process. So I think I just want to make it very clear that this idea that there's so much focus on both illness and then rehabilitation and purification when someone has become impure, that's new. And that's something that Leviticus brings to the table we didn't have before.
I was smiling because I remember being in Israel and teaching this text to a bar mitzvah student of mine during lockdown. And it was still very much towards the beginning of lockdown. And people did feel a lot of blame for having exposed themselves and then exposed other family members. And so it wasn't, we were talking about the text as a theoretical of what the world could be, but dealing with really just the sense of guilt and shame for having been exposed to the virus.
Absolutely.
One of the things that also comes out in Sefer Vayikra, in the book of Vayikra, is models of leadership and how the Kohen, how the priest or the high priest takes on certain responsibility in the community. They have to take on collective guilt and they have to hold collective guilt. They have to offer sacrifices. They have to confess their own, I don't know, it's not indiscretions, that their own transgressions. And it's, so Leviticus offers us, as we said, like the model for community structure, but part of that community structure is how does the leader take responsibility and how are they accountable for what's going on in the community? And I've always thought that is just a really beautiful model for what leadership can look like, is that the leader is not responsible alone for what happens in the community, but there is a checks and balance system that exists in Vayikra. If the leader is not doing what they need to be doing, the people need to call out the leader and to say, well, we need to offer the sacrifice because something has happened as a community. And if the leader identifies that something is happening within the community, they need to call out the community. And so there always has to be this discussion. Like, you can't have the community and the leader separated from one another.
It's almost like when we were talking about Esther recently, that there's this big separation in the book of Esther. There's this wall, and there's the leader on the inside, and there's the people of Shushan on the outside, and Mordecai is right at the gate, and he's able to kind of go in between. And when Esther fasts and the people fasts, there is suddenly a connection point where it had been broken. Here, the people are coming to the temple. They meet in the courtyard. There is always this meeting happening at all times. And even if only the Kohanim can go into the Kiddush Kiddushim of the Holy of Holies and only on Yom Kippur, only with a rope tied around his leg, because if he dies in there,
the transgressions,
that's dangerous. But there's always a point of meeting, and that there's not only is there, I go even further in the analogy you made. When you offer a korban, a sacrifice to God, and you get to go meet God. You get to share and have dinner with God. Think about it. You go, and what would happen is you would offer up your big bull, let's say, there, and the sort of the entrails get all put onto the altar, and those get made into smoke. Kind of the dark meat sections mostly get given to the Kohanim, and more like the white meat sections are then given to the person offering sacrifice. And that within a offering of abundance, or offering how grateful you are, you have to finish it before the morning.
Right.
It's a lot of food, which means that you need to share with your community. You have to bring people together. So it might seem very different from all of us, but it's kind of like a big barbecue back then, where you'd have to be there in the courtyard of the Mishkan and bringing your tribe, your clan, and you would share in that together. And there is something so community building about that. I think of like the big barbecues in Gan Sacher in Jerusalem, and like the main park, which always there's like tons of trash left all over the place, all over. But this idea of like coming together for a big barbecue, you can even think of in America in more ancient times, when people would hunt for game and would like kill the big animal, the bison or something, and it wouldn't keep. You would have to all like the tribe would come together. There is something that is cohesive about that and building, and that's the fact that prayer is then sort of mirrored on top of the sacrificial rite. The same thing. We build community. We come here for prayer, and it's almost the same community galvanizing aspect.
I think that's all really interestingly and well said. The times, so Leviticus takes place in the desert, in the Mishkan, in their portable sanctuary, and when they get to the land of Israel, they eventually try to make a more centralized place to offer sacrifice, and there's different places to offer sacrifice, which is not pleasing to God, and then it ends up being centralized in Jerusalem in the temple. And when there's corruption that exists, it's because the sacrificial order has been disrupted, and the sacrifices are being made, but without the intentionality. And so there needs to be, there's some kind of corruption either on the side of the priests or on the side of the people. And then that's when we hear the prophets, like, you have to go about it. It has to be a full body, mind exercise.
Right. Jeremiah says, I loathe your sacrifices. Here you're doing all of these things. In the meantime, you are not treating your people well. Isaiah harps on this as well. This idea that there has to be a cohesion behind, like, this is more of a kever kavanah discussion, but one that there has to be an alignment between the ritual and the intentions behind it.
So I think that sacrifice, I spoke to a friend who has had a lot of interaction with religions that still practice a form of animal sacrifice. And I asked, what is that experience? And they said, when you are in that space, when an animal is being sacrificed, and that sounds like appalling to me as a vegetarian and a animal lover, but said everything is on the line. Everything is on the line. It's like, it's a visceral existential experience. You understand that something is going to lose its life so that you can have an offering, a communal experience. Like, everything is so raw and delicate in that moment. And I assume that that is what the sacrificial order was about. And today we hope that we can have those kinds of experiences from prayer. But I think that sometimes we maybe feel disconnected from it in the way that we would. I'm not suggesting that we go back to animal sacrificing, but we feel disconnected from prayer, from our words, because nothing's on the line when we're praying, or us in our community probably don't feel that our souls and our sins and our future is on the line. And so I'm wondering, how do we take the model and the inspiration from Vayikra, and how do we bring that into our spiritual practice? How do we make prayer? How do we make the words that come out of our mouths? How do we make the prayers within our heart? How do we make that something that feels raw enough or alive enough that that it changes something in us? I think that the whole idea of that the sacrifice is supposed to change something in you.
I have an answer. I think it's something that you and I hold very dear to ourselves, and that's, I think many of our congregants, they may be surprised to the degree to which Leviticus and the rituals we're explaining are the basis for Shabbat table, and that the main idea of the rabbis were to make your home the mikdash me'at, the small, also the small tabernacle, and that when we offer two chalot, it's because there's a double portion of manna, and because it's twice good on Shabbat. And when we put salt on top of the challah, it's just like the grain being the salt, the incense being made as well at the temple. And that what we are doing at a Friday night is a large replication of the same sense. So I don't know if I mentioned this for you or not, but just hear me out for a second. Like the idea of creating a regular, periodic communal meeting point where we come together and in which we offer gratitude and we like give the best of ourselves. Like to me, that is the essence of a Friday night Shabbat dinner. And that, when in my home on a Friday morning, I'm very grateful for the fact that my entire home smells like challah every Friday morning, and that's something my wife likes to do. And I know that for my kids, it's not like my daughter's home from college right now, and I can tell you that one of the number one thing on her like to-do list is Friday night we're gonna have Shabbat dinner together, and that's like the nexus of our family, and that's also like of our communal regular gathering and a time for us to express gratitude and connection. I find that to be a very prayerful moment and a very prayerful ritual, one that is very much for me based on exactly the rituals we're talking about from Leviticus. How does that land on you?
It lands.
I know for you it's very
It
important.
lands, and I think that what the Jewish tradition wants us. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't presume to say that I know what the Jewish tradition wants from us. But my understanding is that we have to be all in. And when you're making a ritual sacrifice, you're all in. When you think that your soul is on the line, when you think that your family, your ability to function within the society is based on whether you've pleased God in the right way or not, then you're all in. And as someone who doesn't feel that energy sitting on my shoulder, like you have to do this or else, right. It's sometimes hard to find the self-motivator for creating the structure. Right. And the Jewish tradition is about creating structure. Like it's all about creating structure to live your life in a certain way so that you experience a certain thing, so that you pass it on and then they do those things too. And living in a modern age where there's a lot of choice and a lot of freedom and not a lot of judgment if you do something or don't do something, right, within the religious framework in my life at the moment, it makes it hard to experience the sense of, what's on the line. Yeah, absolutely. Can I shift and say one of the things that I love that. We talked about, there was a podcast earlier about story of creation. We talked about, I was making the case that the story of creation is less a story about creating new things, but setting boundaries and sort of God cleaning up God's room, that there's already
there's already water, there's already wind, there's air, there's some sort of land, and it's about separation between night and day, and land and water and sky and the ocean, etc. And that a lot of that is mapped onto the Book of Leviticus, that the human body as a microcosm of the world, and that the same idea of the concern about when those boundaries are transgressed, specifically when the life force of blood comes out of the body,
Yeah.
that is a concern. And I would liken this as well. We're coming up on Passover. Like the plague of the Nile turning into blood is not just about a cool magic trick. It is about the life source of the Egyptian people turning into blood, being the sign that when blood is coming out of the body, that is a sign that might be ending, or life is in peril, it's in jeopardy, and this boundary has been violated and transgressed. And so this idea of the human body as B'Tselem Elohim, the image of God, and as a microcosm of the universe that has been created, all being sort of one and being treated with the same sanctity. I think that what it says about the body is something that is, again, so ahead of its time. It's also one of these big differences, I would say, between a Jewish view and, let's say, a Christian view, in which the Christians somewhat adopted from the Greeks idea that the body is simply a vessel for the soul, which is sacred, but the body itself is not so important. And in the Torah, the body is sacred. It is of equal. It's these two go hand in hand, and the body is not just a receptacle for the soul. The body is a reflection of the universe that needs to be treated with the same like delicate care. And this is why there's so much about purification around when blood comes out of the body, and this includes menstruation, of course, but also within diseases and also within injuries, that is seen as that violation is a red alarm, red alert, right, going off for the Book of Leviticus, and that we need to take care of it and make sure that those boundaries are mended and brought back and put into place for the order of the universe to continue.
Well, can I go on that? Leviticus also lays out what the boundaries of relationships are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is an appropriate relationship between two people? What is not an appropriate relationship between two people? What is a relationship the whole idea of a relationship between a man and a woman is to lead to life. And if that relationship cannot be viable to lead to life, then that relationship is not a holy relationship. And so it's about creating boundaries in terms of how we even exist with other people. Like it talks about incest, God forbid. That is not a holy relationship, because that's not a viable outcome.
Right. The worst b'nai mitzvah Torah portion is the one who gets all of the forbidden relationships, like don't sleep with your sister and your mother and your animals, etc. But they're there for a reason.
They're there for a reason. And it's interesting. This year, I'm working with a student who shall remain nameless. But one of the things that we're talking about is, well, what happens when the Book of Vayikra, societal norms change? A man and a man can't lie together because that's not a viable relationship to bring life into the world. Well, now we have another understanding about what relationships are and what's considered a holy relationship and how you have holy relationships. So the text is not just you do this and you can't do that. The text, I say, is a starting point for conversation. The Torah says we need boundaries. True, we need boundaries, but what are the boundaries? How do we create them?
A very reformed perspective you're making right now. That we should, with modern eyes, be able to take the values of the Torah and we should adjust accordingly.
If I didn't say that, I wouldn't be truthful. I mean, there's what I feel.
You also wouldn't be a female rabbi.
There's what I feel, and there's what I think probably makes sense in terms of perpetuation of Judaism long term. And then there's also the world that I live in. To say that a homosexual relationship is not a sacred relationship, that wouldn't be something that I could say and agree to. So I think we have the Torah never, in the rabbinic Jewish tradition, which we abide by, or which we are descendants of, was never about taking something at face value and saying, well, that's what it is. It was saying, this is what it is, and this is how our society looks like, and how do we find a connecting point from here to here? And if it doesn't work, for instance, if a child talks back to their parents, the Torah says you should stone them. And the rabbinic literature said, well, then we will never have teenagers.
Yes.
And so it's about creating sanctified relationships it's about creating sanctified relationships, but also understanding that societal norms change.
Rabbi, I was recently learning an article about Leviticus prohibits spaying and neutering animals. And that's because the fact that it says that you can't offer an animal that has any sort of its reproductive organs damaged or lost. And it says, and you shall not do this in your land. And that's taken to mean not just you should not sacrifice them, but you should not do this practice. And it's the same idea that if God's first commandment is pru or vu, to go forth and multiply, that to do anything to limit the fecundity of the of
Nice
life, thank you, that we should not do it because that's an abomination of God as creator. And so we could do an entire separate podcast, and maybe we should, about what that means for relationships that do not naturally, organically lead to or produce new lives, right? I think that's a really interesting thing for us to talk about. But yeah, I didn't know. Did you know that you can't spay or neuter according to halacha? And I wonder
what source?
what's Israel? It's like
I'll tell you that.
What's Israel going to do with every cat in every
I'll
dumpster?
tell you that the state will they have a budget to neuter cats because there's some. If you don't know, Israel doesn't have squirrels, but but it has street cats.
It has thousands and
of
millions of street cats in every dumpster and every place. Yes.
Well, my cat, who's in White Plains right now, was one of those cats. So.
You're allowed to give your animal to a non-Jew to spay or neuter. It's very similar to selling someone your chametz during Passover, and you can pay them for the services of holding your cat. And if they spay and neuter it while they have it, then you can have your cat back.
Let's say that's what I did with her.
I want to say one last thing, rather esoteric, about Leviticus, and then we'll wrap up soon, I'm sure. There's a wonderful book. One of my favorite books of Torah commentary is Mary Douglas's book, Leviticus is Literature. And she writes about not only everything that we said about now, which is that one final meaning of the book of Leviticus is that it is an attempt to recreate and experience Mount Sinai. And that the tripartite division between the outer courtyard, inner courtyard, and Holy of Holies, and who gets to go there, completely maps out perfectly to the bottom of Sinai, who got to go up towards the middle, and who got to go up to the very top to receive the Torah, which also maps out to the animal that is killed and which parts each person gets. And one of her points is, in a world without cameras, how do you take an entire generation and have them experience for a moment what it might have been like at Sinai, and that this is sort of like a big experiential program, an educational program to allow future generations. The generation who left Egypt are not the ones that enter into the land of Israel. They completely die out within that 40-year span. How do you pass on the story? And it's almost like a bibliodrama of acting out the awe of Sinai, including the menorah, which is lit on fire, which is meant to be like the burning bush that Moses sees, and also like the thunder and the fire on the top of Mount Sinai. That how do you take moments of awe, wonder, overwhelming emotion? How do you tell the story, and how do you have others feel what you felt in that moment? And that's what she's trying to say, that this is what the Mishkan and the temple are trying to do.
That's a great pedagogical question that we're, I think, dealing with in Jewish education every single day. Like, it's important to me, and how do I make that important to you without you experiencing that?
We have this race against time that we're trying to find every last Holocaust survivor who can give a firsthand account before there's none left, and which it's hard for us to understand what that was going through on that firsthand perspective. I'll say one last thing is that I want to introduce one other word to our listeners here, and this is a very rabbinical school word, chiastic structure. You like that one? That's good. Yes. That within Western literature, we are often conditioned to believe that the most important thing in a text is said first. You say the thesis, you then prove it, and then you have the conclusion. Yes, you love all of this. But within the ancient literature of the Torah, the chiastic structure is much more geared towards having the middle of the text being the most important part. Right? Which is why when you're chanting Torah, the etnachta, the trope, there's this little wishbone trope in the text, is always the middle of even the sentence is marked in every single text. And here Leviticus is the middle of the entire Torah, and Parshat Kiddushim, holiness, is the middle of that entire book. And you could say the entire essence, what the Torah is really about. is about sanctity and holiness, which also in Hebrew means separation, uniqueness, what is different from all of the rest. It's a very Jewish idea of not always fitting in, and that Leviticus is not a throwaway book because it reads like a medieval manual of bloodletting and illnesses, but it is the very heart of what Torah and Judaism is all about, which is the pursuit of sanctification. How do we, in a world of to-do lists and, we have all the things in our minds, how do we pause and how do we experience wonder and separation and different moments in our lives that are going to stand out at the end of the day?
In some ways, it's kind of like our Constitution.
It is.
It's really the binding of the book, and it holds us, and the infrastructure is what allows us to have the experiences. So we have to be bound by something, or we have to know what the rules of the game are, so that we can even play the game. And I think that's what Leviticus is. It's how do you do this? It's responding to moments of humanity, responding to moments of death, responding to moments of relationships between people, between sin, between mistakes, between illnesses. It's what do you do with the things that make you human, and what do you accept? What do you put on the side, and how do you make this life that you're living in the divine and in the image of God and something sacred?
Right. I'll add one last thing to that. I think there's a basic humility again to that the Torah teaches us that tihiyu kiddushim, that you should strive towards being holy, but you're not there. Right? This is a lifelong pursuit. That I remember there's a comment that why is it the two parshiot of Achrimot Kiddushim are put together, because only after death can you speak about someone's life as being holy. Korach, Moses' first cousin, who tries to start a revolution against him in the book of Numbers, says all of the people are holy. Not that we will be, but we are already. And it's seen as a statement of arrogance, but that the book of Leviticus challenges us, saying you're not going to get there, but this is a lifelong, history-long struggle towards finding sacred moments and sacred connections in our lives.
I'm really happy that we talked about this.
Yeah.
To be continued.
We encourage all of our congregants listeners to, it's not an easily readable book, the book of Leviticus, but read it with commentary when you're doing so to understand the different nuances.
And just calling out the Torah study group on Friday if you're in the Bethel vicinity.
What time is that meet, Rabbi?
That's at 10 a.m. on Fridays, and we're going to delve into it because we're going to look at the book of Leviticus through that lens of what does it even mean to be in relationship with one another? Yeah,
it reminds me, one of the other foundational books of commentary, modern ones of Leviticus, is Jacob Milgram's book of Leviticus. You study with his daughter every week, and so you're well prepared on all of this.
She pulled that book out last year, and I was like, oh my.
My dad wrote this.
I was like, were these your bedtime stories?
Oh, very good. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Landi, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.